challenges that we're facing. Ms. Sheridan.
Thank you. I just wanted to make a couple of comments based on what some of my colleagues have said, not to be argumentative, but really just to give a different perspective. I too agree it is unacceptable for a counselor or a teacher to respond to a student on any subject with their personal or religious beliefs. That's not why they work in our buildings, and that needs to stop. Excuse me. I agree with Mr. Marshall that, of course, there aren't complaints and cases that we can just pull up from our LGBTQ employees. They're not protected under our policy. They're not expressing themselves in their workplace. They're not wearing their wedding bands. They're not talking about their vacations. They are not, they don't have pictures of their families on their desks. They're not comfortable doing that because they are not protected. So, of course, you're asking for something that won't exist because they're not out at work. We're not pioneers in this. There are many, all of our neighboring divisions already have this in their policy. There are many divisions throughout the Commonwealth that already have this in their policy. So I would ask if staff can speak to that and how that is addressed in other divisions. Dr.
Sure,
Richards?
I'm happy to. So a quick look at some of the neighboring divisions turns up several that have the general policy, such as the one that we're looking at: Falls Church, Manassas Park City, Manassas City, Fairfax County, Prince William County, and others. And they model it on the VSBA policy guide, which has a general policy such as this one. And it actually, in that guide, it puts that language. It's kind of interesting the way they do it. They have the protected classes that we've mentioned. But then under that, they have a paragraph that says, no student on the basis of sex or gender, excuse me, shall be denied equal access to programs, activities, services, or benefits, or be limited in the exercise of any right, privilege, or advantage, or be denied equal access to educational and extracurricular programs and activities. That's in addition to the paragraph above, which speaks to gender and sex. And then, in another policy, they have additional prohibited behavior. Behavior that is not unlawful may nevertheless be unacceptable for the educational environment or the workplace. Demeaning or otherwise harmful actions are prohibited, particularly if directed at personal characteristics, including but not limited to socioeconomic level, sexual orientation, perceived sexual orientation, or gender identity. So just some sampling from the neighboring districts, and I think where they get their language.
I actually wasn't finished. If I, sorry, and maybe I won't turn my mic back on, but who knows? And the VHSL rules. VHSL already has rules in place, and I don't know who can speak to that or not, or if that is something we can bring back.
We've got. We'll provide some written information. I think Mr. DeVita has provided some information previously in terms of VHSL rules, and we can provide that again.
Thank you. I was hoping the public could have that information as well.
Yes, that's certainly something that we can provide in a public way as well.
And so what troubles me the most is, you know, we're the board up here, we're at the top of the school system, and I can't use my best because it's so horrible. It's my worst example of a staff member being harassed because the person is too identifiable if I use the example. But they're at a level that they're identifiable. They're harassed, and they were harassed. And it's disturbing to me because we talk about unconscious bias, and we talk about harassment and discrimination, and we talk about how we're gonna go in that way to not have that happen here in Loudoun anymore. But we have people in positions of leadership that are harassing and discriminating. Whether they intended it to or not, it happened. I wish I could share it with everyone, but I don't have permission to because that person fears for their job. And my last comment that I really have to make is that members of the LGBT community are not inherently pedophiles. They're usually the victims of assault. And we need to remember that when we make broad statements about bathrooms and locker rooms, that it is not an easy place to be. I am not a member of the LGBT community, but I am an ally. I have been for a very long time. And the stories that I've heard and the things that have been shared with me, it's really important to be able to be who you are, to be comfortable in your skin, to be able to dress the way you would like to be called by the name that you prefer and the pronouns that you want and that you identify with. It's not really a big ask. It seems scary to people, but when you really just sit down and talk to people, they're just like, everybody's just like us. We're all the same on the inside. So why does it really matter what we are on the outside? We're all just people that want to get along. We don't want to be bullied like we were in high school. I was bullied. I was poor. I was, from a broken family. Sure, we're all bullied. Everybody experiences that. But if there's something that we can do as policymakers and board members that help eradicate some of that, eliminate it, or just make people feel more comfortable in their own skin when they're going to school to learn or they're going to work to do the most important job, which is to teach our students, that is why I brought this language forward.
Ms. Kroll.
Thank you. I have 2 pages of notes, but I'm not going to go through all of them. I don't know whether to be angry, embarrassed, or grateful that I'm sitting up here and not out there like I was a couple of years ago when I was embarrassed about the decision that the school board made. And I have the utmost respect for all of my colleagues here. To me, this is about saving lives. If we can save one life by putting this language in, why wouldn't we do that? If we can save one student, we might be saving more than one student. If we can attract more teachers, oh my gosh, we just sat through budget for 3 weeks hearing how it's so hard to attract teachers, we need to pay them more money. This is an economic decision. Let's look at it that way. If this allows us to attract better talent, why wouldn't we do that? I personally know a teacher who won't come to Loudoun County. He will only teach in another state, and he grew up here because of this policy. We are losing talent. We are losing kids. This is a no-brainer to me. And I don't necessarily identify with any political ideology that aligns with this. This, to me, is about the school board's job of keeping our students safe, period. End of story.
Ms. Maloney.
I don't have 2 pages of notes, but I have some else. It's interesting how this is difficult for so many of us to talk about. I think that we know so many people that identify as LGBTQ, and the problem we're trying to address is the discrimination of students and staff due to sexual orientation and gender identity. That is the actual problem. When we talk about bullying and harassment is by definition a power imbalance. It might just be that the bully's popular and you're not. But it might be something like you're LGBTQ or you're perceived to be. And historically and currently, LGBTQ people, just like these other protected classes, including race and sex and national origin and ancestry, are discriminated against. Society makes it harder for the LGBTQ community. It is a fact. It's a fact that Ms. Kroll addressed with some of her statistics. It's a fact that numerous speakers have addressed before the board with their statistics. It's a fact that the previous administration of our federal government made policy around, and in fact issued guidance to all school systems explaining how to better make their school districts not discriminate on gender identity and sexual orientation. They sent out best practices, and of course, you probably can't find, you have to go to the Wayback Machine on the internet now to find that, but it's out there, how this is done properly. And when we talk about the list of nearby counties that have already, school districts that have already done this, the fact that our county has already has this in their hiring policy, in their equal employment policy. We just heard that today. And I appreciate that when we increase the rights of the minority to equal status, that it feels like when you're in the majority that you're losing status. But that's not really what we're asking for. What we're asking for is equal status. So bring those of us who are discriminated against up. I had a personal conversation with a teacher, an LCPS employee, after we passed our legislative agenda that supports adding sexual orientation and gender identity to local employment in Virginia state law. It was covered in the newspapers, and it was covered on grassroots organizations. And he came up to me and he said, I heard that the school board now supports protecting those of us with differing sexual orientation or gender identity from the norm, from being fired for that reason, from being discriminated against for that reason. He said, you know, I'm out at school. My principal knows that I'm gay. And I just don't know sometimes whether that has an effect. And it would just make me feel so much better to know that the school board passed this policy. And I said, I'm sorry, we haven't. We haven't yet. We just don't have the votes yet. So that's what we're facing out there. We had an employee come to us today and say they can't share the fact that they're married. I mean, this, I don't even see the debate.
Ms. Rose?